Welcome back, everyone. Ready for another deep dive?
Always.
Good, good. This time we're heading back to the 1930s, New York City.
Ah, the era of glamour and, well, a bit of grit, too.
Exactly. And right in the middle of it all is Nancy Titterton. Successful writer, living the dream. Just published a new novel even.
Sounds like she had it all.
She did. And to top it off, she's getting some new furniture delivered to her apartment in, get this, Beekman Place.
Beekman Place, huh? Fancy address.
A real hub for New York's elite.
But there's a twist, right? I can sense it.
Oh, there's always a twist.
Ah.
Turns out Beekman Place had a bit of a dark side.
Uh-oh.
Yeah, a string of unsolved murders cast a real shadow over the whole place.
So even in a place like that, danger could be lurking.
Exactly. And Nancy, despite feeling totally safe in her new home, became another victim.
You mentioned she was a writer. Does she ever, write about feeling safe there?
She did. We actually have some letters where she talks about how secure she felt at Beekman Place, which makes what happened even more tragic.
Chilling. So let's talk about the day it all happened. April 10th, 1936. Good Friday.
It was. Starts like any other day. Nancy's husband, Louis Titterton, heads off to work.
Routine stuff.
Yep. Nancy gets a couple of phone calls, one from a friend about dinner plans. All very normal.
Nothing out of the ordinary so far.
Right. But then, around 11:30, a maid in the apartment below hears something.
What did she hear?
A cry for help. Someone yelling for the handyman.
Well, that's not necessarily unusual, is it? Calling for a handyman.
True. And the maid didn't think much of it at the time.
But knowing what we know now...
Yeah. It makes you wonder, was that Nancy? Was she trying to get help?
Gives you chills thinking about it.
It does.
Yeah.
But the day goes on. Later that afternoon, an upholsterer, Theodore Kruger, arrives with his assistant.
To deliver the new furniture.
Yep, a new love seat.
Okay.
They get to Nancy's apartment, find the door slightly open, figure she's home.
Seems reasonable.
Kruger goes upstairs for a minute to grab her phone number. Notices the bathroom light is on, knocks, gets no answer, and he pushes the door open.
And what does he find?
A woman's leg hanging over the side of the bathtub.
Oh, God.
He calls out to her, no response, gets closer, realizes it's Nancy, and she's not moving.
So what does he do?
He panics, yells for his assistant to call the police, and before you know it, the apartment is full of homicide detectives.
Must have been a horrific scene.
It was. Nancy was nude, slip around her waist, pajama top and housecoat tied around her neck. Uses the murder weapon.
Signs of a struggle.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Clothing was ripped. Medical examiner confirmed she was alive when she was put in the bathtub.
Awful. Just awful. So the investigation begins. Who were the initial suspects?
Well, naturally, the husband, Louis, is the first one they look at.
But you said he had an alibi.
Solid one. Cleared him right away. Then they focused on some painters who'd been working in the building.
Well-
Same story. Alibis checked out.
So who else is there?
There was this one odd detail. Turns out, a man had been harassing a countess who lived 2 floors below Nancy.
Harassing how?
Ringing her doorbell, disguising his voice. Definitely acting suspicious.
So maybe a connection there.
Possibly. But as the investigation went on, the focus shifted to someone who was hiding in plain sight.
Intriguing. But before we get into that, let's talk about the media frenzy that this whole case created.
Oh, it was a circus. Tabloids went wild. Spinning tales of intrigue and mystery.
Playing up the sensational aspects, of course.
Absolutely. But then you had papers like the New York Times taking a more, shall we say, scientific approach.
Focusing on the facts and the emerging field of forensic science.
Right. It really highlights that clash between, well, the public's thirst for a good story and the need for, accurate reporting.
A clash that's still relevant today.
Very much so. But getting back to the evidence, a crucial piece emerges. A simple cord found under Nancy's body.
And I'm guessing this cord leads them to...
It does. Enter Dr. Gettler, brilliant biochemist with the NYPD. He examines that cord, identifies a unique fiber, traces it back to a specific manufacturer.
Impressive work.
Oh, it gets better. He narrows it down to a distributor who supplied upholsterers in Manhattan.
Including?
Theodore Kruger, the man who found Nancy's body.
Wow. So now the spotlight is on his assistant, John Fiorenza.
Exactly. And as they start digging into his past, some troubling things come to light.
Like what?
He had a history of criminal behavior, and an old psychiatric evaluation labeled him as a personality deviator.
Not sounding good.
No. And there was something about his demeanor, a lack of remorse, that really set off alarm bells for the investigators.
What was he like, personality-wise?
Quiet, withdrawn,
Huh.
but also capable of impulsive, even violent actions.
A dangerous combination.
Absolutely. And then Dr. Gettler, with his incredible attention to detail, makes another discovery.
What does he find?
A single horsehair on Nancy's bedspread.
A horsehair? Seems like a minor detail.
It was anything but. Turns out that horsehair was a perfect match to the newly delivered love seat.
Placing Fiorenza at the scene after the murder.
Exactly. Remember, the love seat was delivered after they found her body.
That's the smoking gun.
It was. Completely shattered Fiorenza's alibi. And it led to a confession.
What'd he say?
You ready for this? He basically said, and I quote, "She wasn't my type. I just felt like it that day."
Chilling. Just chilling. No remorse whatsoever.
None. It was a confession that, well, shook everyone to their core.
So open and shut case, right? Confession, physical evidence.
You'd think so. But the trial, well, that's where things take an unexpected turn.
How so?
The question of Fiorenza's mental state becomes a major issue.
Yeah, you've got this seemingly straightforward case. The confession. The evidence. All pointing to Fiorenza. But things rarely go as planned, right? Especially in court.
Especially in court. So how did the defense try to handle this?
Well, at first, they went with the classic he's innocent plea.
Oh.
Tried to point fingers at some mysterious attacker. But that didn't really hold water for long. Makes sense. So what did they do?
They shifted gears. Decided to go for the insanity plea, hoping to raise enough doubt, to sway the jury.
Insanity pleas. Those were pretty uncommon back then, weren't they?
They were, and not always well received by the courts or the public.
Tough to prove, too.
Oh, incredibly tough. You had to convince everyone that the defendant genuinely didn't understand what they were doing or the consequences. A very high bar.
So how did they try to build their case?
They called in a bunch of witnesses, family members mostly, tried to paint a picture of Fiorenza as someone with a troubled past, odd behaviors.
Give me some examples.
Well, they said he was withdrawn, prone to strange utterances, talking to things that weren't there even.
Always makes you think how much of that is true and how much is, family trying to protect their own.
Exactly. It's a tough line to walk, trying to get a clear picture of someone's mental state, especially when those closest to them have a stake in the outcome.
So what was the prosecution's counter-argument?
They focused on the fact that despite all these supposed eccentricities, Fiorenza was able to function. He had a job, a relationship.
And most importantly,
He knew the difference between right and wrong. Their whole argument hinged on that. He knew what he did was wrong.
did they present any expert testimony?
Oh, yeah. This is where things get really interesting. The defense brings in this psychiatrist, Dr. Albert Crane.
To assess Fiorenza.
Right. And Dr. Crane testifies that Fiorenza suffered from what they called back then dementia precox. Today, we'd call it schizophrenia.
So they're arguing he wasn't in control of his actions.
Exactly. But here's the thing. The prosecution, during cross-examination, uncovers this tiny little detail that blows the whole defense strategy out of the water.
What was it?
It came out that after Fiorenza confessed to the police, he refused to repeat that confession to the assistant district attorney.
Why?
Because, he said, it could be used against him.
Uh-huh. So he understood the legal implications.
Exactly. It completely contradicted this idea that he didn't understand the severity of his actions. And Dr. Crane, on the stand, had to admit that.
Wow, talk about a turning point.
It was. The prosecution then brought in their own psychiatric experts, and they all agreed. Regardless of any mental illness, Fiorenza knew that what he did was wrong.
And the fact that he tried to cover up the crime.
Further cemented their point.
So you have this courtroom battle, one side painting Fiorenza as mentally ill, not responsible for his actions, the other saying, no, he knew exactly what he was doing.
It really raises a bigger question. How do we deal with mental illness in the legal system? It's a question that's still relevant today.
Absolutely. It's about finding that balance between justice and compassion.
Right. So the jury deliberates for nearly 20 hours, trying to weigh all the evidence, and ultimately they reach a verdict.
And what was the verdict?
Guilty on both counts, murder and rape.
Despite the defense's efforts, the evidence and that crucial slip-up were just too strong.
They were. But even with the verdict, Fiorenza's attorney doesn't give up. He files an appeal, argues that Fiorenza was mentally confused during the crime.
Still fighting for his client, even after the guilty verdict?
He was. But the legal process had run its course, and on January 22nd, 1937, John Fiorenza was executed in the electric chair at Sing Sing.
What were his last words?
He said, "You don't know all I've been through in this place. I don't know why they don't give me a chance."
Haunting. Do you think he was truly confused? Or was that a last attempt to gain sympathy?
It's hard to say, but it adds another layer of complexity to this already complicated case, the murder of Nancy Titterton.
It really captured the nation's attention, didn't it?
It did. And it wasn't just the brutality of the crime, it was everything that came after. The media frenzy, the legal battles, the questions about mental illness.
And the role of forensic science, too. Dr. Gettler's work in this case was remarkable.
Absolutely. Tracing that fiber in the cord, connecting that horsehair to the love seat. It showed the power of scientific analysis in a criminal investigation.
It really paved the way for so many of the techniques we use today.
It did. But this case also forces us to ask some uncomfortable questions about human nature, about how someone who seems good-natured can commit such a horrific act.
The darkness that can hide beneath the surface.
Exactly. It's something to think about. And let's not forget about the media circus surrounding it all. It really blew up.
Oh, for sure. It wasn't just reporting, it was like creating a spectacle.
Right. The tabloids especially, they ate it up. Intrigue, mystery, you name it.
They even brought in astrologers.
I know, right? Looking for some cosmic explanation for Fiorenza's actions. Wild stuff.
Shows you how much people crave those simple explanations, even for something so horrible.
Like they needed a story that made sense of it all. Heroes and villains. Good versus evil.
Right. And then you had the New York Times, like we talked about, trying to stick to the facts, the science.
Two totally different approaches, reflecting, I guess, the two sides of the human psyche. The need for entertainment and the search for truth.
And that tension, it's still with us today. The way crime is portrayed in the media, the rush to judgment, the focus on personalities, the oversimplification, we haven't come that far.
It's a good reminder to be skeptical of everything we see and hear, to look for different perspectives.
Absolutely. And I think this case also, warns us about judging people based on appearances. Fiorenza seemed like an average guy, blended right in.
Yet he was capable of such a terrible act.
Yeah.
Makes you wonder how many others are out there, just like him.
Hiding in plain sight.
It's unsettling, for sure. But it's important to remember, you never really know what's going on inside someone's head.
No, you don't. So we spent quite a bit of time with this case, with Nancy Titterton, with John Fiorenza.
A real journey through the underbelly of 1930s New York.
And we've seen how the media shaped perceptions, how the justice system struggled with mental illness, how forensic science ultimately brought the truth to light.
And I think one of the biggest lessons here is, things are rarely as they seem. Truth can be very complex.
So, to everyone listening, take this with you. Be observant. Be critical. And remember, darkness can lurk in the most unexpected places.
That's a great note to end on. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive. We'll be back soon with another fascinating story.